Hey, what's going on, guys? So this is our lesson 5, but part 2. I decided to split the videos into two so that I don't overstretch the video time. I'm also considerate of your time. So routing is simply mapping HTTP requests to code that handles them. Okay. So in the last lesson, we are looking at controllers, and we saw that controllers handle the requests, but then routes are going to map our requests to those controller methods that are going to process the request, and then the feedback, return the feedback to the user. Okay, cool. So by default, Laravel's routes are classified into 4 categories like we saw in part 1 of this tutorial. Awesome. So this is where we are. They are found in the routes directory, and we have the web.php. So this contains files, routes that have access to the session state, CSRF protection, and cookie encryption. Okay, and then we have the API. So this if you're ever going to write an API like a mobile API, you're going to write the routes in here. So it contains routes that are intended to be stateless. And those routes have access to rate limiting and such things. And then the console.php contains closure-based console commands. So console commands that you run on the fly, on the go. You define them here. Cool. And then you have channels.php. This is where you define event broadcasting channels for your for your for your for your application. So if you didn't go through lesson 1, if this is new to you, I'd recommend that you go through that so that you can learn these things. Otherwise, thank you. Let's proceed. But before we proceed, let me just show you. I think before I forget, I can show you a quick thing about routes. Actually, routes, the files are defined here, but they are controlled by the service provider, a service provider called the route service provider. You can find it in app providers route service provider. So this is where all your routes are called. Okay, at least for the ones that are used for responding to requests. Okay, so we have the web route. We have the web route. So by default, this just attaches the web middleware to your all the routes that you are going to define here, right? So you could also add your own. For example, we're going to define another set of routes specifically for the dashboard. So instead of having to define all of them here, you remember we are talking about the categories controllers being 2. So you could easily cause conflicts if you are going to import them in the same file. So in order to avoid that, you can create another file here called dashboard. Cool. So inside dashboard.php, we can define our routes here. The routes for our dashboard are going to be defined in here, right? So I'm just showing you a possible way of adding new route files. So you are not restricted to use only the 4 that they give you, right? You could also nest them in another directory if you like, so as many as you want. So you're not restricted in any way. And then the only thing that you need to remember is that is for the web, for the let's assume for the front facing, the user facing part. For the admin facing, we could pass some middleware. For example, we have auth, web, and then we'll need also auth, and then also we'll need verified. Okay, so the work of the web middleware is to give us access to the CSRF token and the session. And then auth is to make sure that we are logged in, the user is actually logged in, and verified is for making sure that the user's email is verified before they can go to the admin dashboard. Okay, cool. You can also add further restrictions here, right? So for example, if you wanted the user to be upgraded as an admin before they can access this page, you could do this. You could do that here. So make sure also you specify this, and then there are extra methods that we can use. So if, for example, if I do this, you can see there are so many other methods. For example, I would like to add like the name, all routes that come through here shall start with the name dashboard. So I could do that here, dashboard dot, so dashboard dot categories, dashboard dot whatever, and then we can also add the prefix. So all routes will be required to have a slash dashboard. Okay, cool. So we shall see the effect of that in a few when we start really using the dashboard. So this is enough to create our dashboard routes, and then inside here, inside our dashboard, so we can now start defining our dashboard. But this gives us access to this middleware, and also all our names. You shall start with dashboard dot whatever thing you want to do, and then the prefix, or it shall be dashboard / everything else that you define inside dashboard. I hope that's clear. If it's not clear, we shall see more when we start using these things for our application. So defining routes. So to define routes like we saw, we just need to use the route facade. So yeah, so for example, we wanted categories, so we could do categories controllers. So you make sure you select the one for the dashboard. You could do this. So every time you go / dashboard / categories, so /dashboard / categories will load the index method in the categories controllers of the dashboard. So this one here. So if you check here, this is what will be loaded, this categories controller and this method. So what we've defined here will help us to access this method here. Cool. So in the dashboard namespace. Okay, cool. So that's fine. So to access this route, for example, let me just fire up my control panel, my XAMPP server. I don't know if I already did this, but you can do that by PHP artisan serve. Cool. And then we can go here and just test our system. So this is our homepage, and then let's go to / yeah, cool. So it's trying to redirect us to the login route, but as you can see, it's not defined because we have not initialized the login, the authentication scaffolding. Cool. So you can see that is already working. If you would like to use another, for example, if you'd like to use the ones on the for the front facing parts, for example, you could do route and then get blog, and then inside here we define our blog controller, and then class, and then the method is index, right? Cool. So we have to make sure that we go to the blog controller and make sure that we define our index method, otherwise it's going to return an error. So return yebo. Cool. So if you try to go to / blog, cool, you can see it's returning our thing here. So it has mapped to our function and returns our functionality. Okay, right. So it's cool. For basic stuff, that's cool enough. So we also have resource routes, and resource routes are used to assign CRUD routes to the controller. So for example, if you wanted the posts route to access the post route, we could do something like this in our dashboard, just in one line, and we access all the methods inside the post controller. So we have that. That's our method. Alt Shift Enter to do that by default. Cool. So resource post is going to point to that. Yeah, and this is going to load all the methods for doing CRUD operations. CRUD just means create, read, update, and delete. Yeah. So what this means, what these lines means, it means we have access to the following URIs and route names. For example, if you define it like this, you're going to have a get route for posts, then route name is posts.index. So for example, for us, we had let me just show you this by example. So instead of returning this, let's try to return a route, a constructed route, and the name of the route dash. Let's say we want to return the URL for posts. Okay. So the URL for posts is going to be dashboard dot post dot index. Okay, so this is the route index for posts, and let me try to refresh. Where's the application? If I try to do this, you can see it has loaded the URL for posts. Okay, so this is the URL for listing posts. So the next one is for creating a new post. So it's post.create, but because we had prepended our route name with dashboard, you'll have to prepend your route name with that dashboard dot whatever. So this is post.create. So dashboard.post.create instead of just post.create. And you can if you try that, you'll see it's going to return routes for creating a new. So if you go to this post create something, it's going to try to load it, but then because we have not done the login scaffolding, it's going to fail because we don't have the routes for authentication yet. So we shall add those later. But as you can see, it works. And let's say we want to construct the route for storing. So post.store, and so you just do store here, and if you try to access this route, let's see what happens. All right, so it's still dashboard /posts, but it's supposed to be a post request. So if you do this, it's going to do it's going to do the get request, but then even though the URL is the same, as you can see, post, this one is a post request, this one is a get request. So post means we are sending data to be saved into the database, and get means we are getting something from the server. Okay, right. So another one is for showing one particular post. So the way you do that is post.show, and then you have to pass in the post. Okay, so the way you do that in Laravel, for example, let's say our post is we load one post from the database, and then you say first. Okay, so what you do, you make sure you do this, and then you pass in the post. Okay, if let's just try that first. Let's see if it works. Cool. So you can see http dashboard posts, then for the ID of the post. Okay, but if you fail to pass this, it's going to give you an error, and it says missing required parameters for route post. So by default, it requires you to pass a post ID, but I usually prefer to just pass in the model instance of the post, so that Laravel will decide by default if it's going to pick the ID or anything else. So that is important, because sometimes you might want the post to be loaded by a different field except the ID, for example a UUID or a slug. And if you explicitly define the posts, this also could work, right? So let's see how that works. This also will work, all right? And without defining the ID, this also will work, all right? So, but the problem is, if you ever change and you want to reference your posts from the database using a different method, for example, if you had done ID in many views, it could potentially lead to you having so many breakages in your application. So it's better to just pass the model instance, and Laravel is going to automatically resolve that. Okay, so left side. So we have also another get request for the editing page. So this you just change here to edit and make sure you pass in the post. And so what this does is it's going to return so the dashboard categories. So it's going to return, so they create one, we return content from here. They store one, this, we use this method. They show one, we use this method. The edit, where we are now, is going to use this. So if, for example, you're returning a form for editing a category, it's going to return whatever you tell it to return here. Okay, cool. So that's how you do it, /edit, and then you make sure you pass in the post that you want to be edited. Okay, cool. So we go back to so put or patch. This is for updating a record. So as you can see, it's the same as the get for showing, but this one it loads after you have edited, you push it to the server, and that is going to access this method here for updating. So it's going to pick up the request with the fields, and then also it's going to load the category, and then you take this category and then update it with values from the request. Okay, so this one accepts 2 parameters, and these parameters are going to give you access to the data. This one gives access to the data, and this one gives you access to the category, loads the category for you. Cool. And then you have the delete one. So for deleting, let's say we delete. Let's try to access that and see what happens. So the delete route is going to give you access to the destroy method of your controller, and that is destroy. Okay, destroy as the route name. Okay. Yeah, so post.destroy. Okay, so this one is going to try to delete this, but let's just see what happens. As you can see, cool. You're supposed to use the delete HTTP valve. If you try to access it via a get like this, as you can see, the route is the same from here. So the URI is the same, URI is the same here. So this URI is the same, URI is the same, URI is the same. So what differs is the method, the HTTP verb, and that is what makes the difference between displaying a resource, updating a resource, and deleting a resource. So we shall see more about this later. So it gives you access to this, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 functionality, only this one liner. Okay, cool. So you can also assign multiple resources in the controller by using the resources method. So this is resource for one, but you can also do resources for many. For example, define, where is that? So resource. So if we wanted to use several, for example, we have categories, and we also have posts. So what it allows you to, instead of having to define resource here and then another resource here for categories, okay, like this, categories, right? Instead of having to do this, you can just do route, sorry, the route facade, and then resources, okay, then and then you pass in an array, and you list your resources here. So you make sure this is not a comma, but an array, so a key value pair, and you can list as many as you want. So for example, you can also add the categories, like that. We also had another one for users, so you can also do users and users controller. Cool. So just like that. And then you have to, so this is, you can see it's a one-liner, and you're able to do all this stuff to import all this routes. So you have access to all the 7 routes for posts, all the 7 routes for categories, all the 7 routes for users. Okay, cool. Now let's see, let's have the API routes. You may define your API routes in the routes API.php. So by default, routes written in this file are accessed by prefixing with the /API, /API. Okay, cool. So let me try to do something here. For example, let me define a, let me just try to define a new controller. For example, API / hello world. Okay, so cool. So we got them. We got that. So it has created the API directory and created a hello world. So if you wanted to be able to access that route, you come here and you do route, and then you say get hello world, and so this is, you're going to do hello world class, and like we said, this needs to be an array, and the next element is the method, just like that. Cool. So you have to make sure you go and define this method inside your hello world thingy. So public function index, and then return hello, return hello world. Cool. So I forgot to add world, so I'm doing world by deliberately. Okay, cool. So let's try to fire up our server again and try doing that. So we go to API / hello world. Okay, API hello world. All right, so the error is here. So actually it's supposed to be hello world, and you can see it's accessing our API rights now, right? Cool. So just like that. So what I wanted you to see is that you don't have to prefix it with /API here, because it has been done automatically when this file is being loaded. So you only have to do it from when you're trying to access that route. And if you wanted to display it like we were doing, for example, if you wanted to construct the URL, okay, so API dot hello, okay, cool. So you can see it's returning our URL here. So you make sure, so it's actually not prefixed with this API dot. So I always prefer to do it this way, because you could be having another categories controller here for the API. So in order to differentiate the name from the others, you can prefix it with the API dot, like we did for our dashboard. And we shall see more about that later. Okay, so yeah, so basically that's it. Awesome. So like, for example, if you wanted users, you could do / your site.test / API / users, like so. Okay, you can also use resource routes in API by instead of using now the resources, you use API resource. So this is going to automatically map those resources to the API middleware. Okay, cool. So that's awesome. Let's see. So you can also do several resources in one line. So that will be like we did for resources. So this is API resource for one, API resources for many, and then instead of passing one element, you pass an array, and then with all your elements that you want to access. Okay. So for the API, the create and edit routes, they're excluded because they're only required for web routes. Okay. So because they load HTML templates for creating and editing files. So inside here, API resources, you lack those two routes. Okay. So you only have access to the index for listing, store for storing, show for loading one, updating and destroy. So just like with any other Laravel features, you have the ability to change the default behavior of your application's routes. This includes modifying route prefixes, route group actions, and even adding other route groups. Okay. Yeah. So like we saw, adding the new route file and also registering it in the route service provider. Okay. So using HTTP verbs. So HTTP verbs are actually helps Laravel to know how to respond to your requests. Okay. Nice. So so if you want a get method, so get doesn't send any data to the server. It only retrieves data from the server. You do route get something, and then post actually post is used for pushing data to the server, and then put is for updating. Patch also is for updating. You can read more about those on the internet. So these two are for updating, and then the delete verb is for this removing data. So you have the ability to define routes that respond to several verbs. You use the match method, and then you pass in the first parameter is an array with the elements, with the list of the elements, and then the URI, and then a closure. So you can also define a route that responds to all HTTP verbs by doing using the any method. So any, for example, if you wanted to respond to all HTTP verbs that go to the dashboard, you could put any dashboard, and then whatever here, you can add your functionality here. We also have route parameters. For example, if you wanted to, you can also define route parameters in your routes. If you use the resource method, it defines these parameters for you by default, but you can also do that manually. Let's go ahead and define this. Yeah, so you can go to blog and then forward ID, whatever. So it's going to return our ID here. So it's going to pick our ID and return the ID is 1. So if you put here 2, going to return 2 here. So it's used to help us to capture parameters from the URL. Okay. You could also do ID and then name. Okay, so the ID is and the name is name. Okay, so function ID name, and if you return this, so the name is not defined, so the name is, let's say, hello. Cool. So it has picked our ID and it has picked our name. Okay. Yeah. So like we said, in this case, the ID parameter is mandatory here. So if you don't define this, if you don't pass this, the URL is not going to be available. And you can also capture an optional parameter. If you wanted the name to be optional, you can do that. So, and name here, let's say it goes to null. So if we try to refresh this, it's giving you that, but if we remove the hello in front of here, it's still going to work. But if we don't add this question mark here, and we try to refresh, it's going to tell us our URL is not found. So adding this question mark, suffixing the name with the question mark makes the parameter optional, right? So okay, makes the parameter optional, and you can still access the URL without that parameter defined. But if you have it, you can add it there, and if you refresh, it's going to be captured. Okay, cool. That's awesome with route parameters. So other route actions, we have naming routes like we saw earlier. So if you want to name a route, so like we saw, naming allows us to conveniently generate URLs instead of having to explicitly define the URLs. You just call the name. Let me just show you by example. For example, blog.show. I could create another route here called blog / and then ID. Cool. And then we say we go to the show method. So you make sure that you create a show method inside your blog controller. So for example, we wanted to load the first, so we can pass the ID here like this, and then we can return the ID. Okay, we can actually return the ID from the controller like so, right? In order to access this route, the second route here, so I return route. So this one is called show. We can return show here, and then you have to make sure that we load the posts. We don't even need to load it. We can just do posts and then first. Okay, so that's going to generate our route. So if we go to this and then our home page now, it's going to return that. All right, so this one is not returning that because we have not named it. So we name it, we can name it blog.show, and so we return name blog.show. So you make sure whenever you're trying to construct it using the route helper, you you pass in the name that you have defined here, right? So let's try to refresh that. We're going to construct our route for us. Okay, cool. So that's the fun with naming, the thing with naming. And for example, this one, we could if we wanted to be able to construct the URL for this, we could also do name, and the name can be, let's say, blog.index. So you make sure that, because this one doesn't require any parameters, you don't need to pass any parameter here. So you can get rid of this part here. Yeah, so blog.index, and it doesn't require any parameter in the URL. So let's try to return that. See, good, it has constructed the URL. So the naming helps us to construct the URL using the route helper. Okay, cool. You can also redirect to a route. For example, let's say here we have another. We actually have if we go to / blog, we actually have that route defined. Let me just go to the blog controller and return. We are at blog. We are in the blog controller index method. Okay, let's try to do that again. Nice. So we are in the blog controller index method. So let's say we wanted whenever somebody hits our home page, we redirect them to the blog. Okay, so the way we do that, like you've seen here, we use the redirect helper, and then we chain it with the route method, and then we pass the name. Okay, so that is another way of doing this. We can use the route, redirect, and then we chain it with route, and then the name of the route. You can see it redirects us to the blog controller index. Okay, so yeah, you can redirect it using the named URL. So that's cool. So so what I wanted to show you was for example, if you didn't want to use this, you could also do. So the good thing about naming is, like, if we change this to blog/posts or something, because the name still remains the same, if we ever change this, it doesn't affect our code. So that's the good thing about naming, is in case you ever do something in future, it doesn't really, yeah. So the name has, you can see the URL has changed, okay, but the name remains the same. So the name remains constant. Let's try to change this to something else. We can say also, instead of blog, we say posts. Even though the URL has changed, you can still use the name to reference this particular route. Okay, cool. So it helps us to have consistency in our code and to easily construct those URLs without much hassle. Okay, so it also prevents breaking your code. Good. We also have something important called route groups. So route groups allows us to share route parameters across several routes, and these parameters may be specified in an array form as the first parameter of the group method of the route facade. Okay, cool. So facade, if you're wondering what facade is just a software design pattern. It allows you, like you see the route thing, it's actually a whole implementation. It's not just one class, it's a whole implementation. So the facade allows us to access all that functionality using just one object, instead of having to call them independently, each one of them. You chain your methods like this, and they give you access to the entire API, route API. So that's the work of the facade. So Laravel uses it a lot, as you shall discover later. Cool. So For example, if you wanted to define our admin routes, so if you wanted all your routes to have access to the auth and verified middleware at the same time, be prefixed with admin/posts, at the same time, the route name to start with admin.post.whatever, you do that here. For example, if it's the middleware or if it's the prefix, so you define that as the array elements, and then the whatever you want to access as the array value. And we shall be able to understand more about this. So for example, instead of doing this, I'd have I could define also a number of methods. So for example, routes, and then I do group. So the first thing we do here is to pass all the whatever we want, and then we define a closure here, and then inside here we can have a route. So let's say admin, we can have middleware, and then let's say we want every route that is going to be defined here should be accessed only by logged in users. So for example, if we get our route here and put it in here, if you try to go to a home page now, you're going to be try to be redirected to the login page. So let's see, if you refresh that, you see, yeah, cool. For example, we say home. We can also do maybe about, blog.about, even though let's just return the whatever, about, yeah, cool. So if I was to do this without adding it to the middleware group, I can go to about, and it's going to return some text, but if I put it here inside our group, our route group, okay, you can see it's being restricted by the auth middleware. So, but I can also remove this. If I remove this, you can see it works. Okay, right. So fine. We can also let's see about prefixes. Prefix with let's say home. So if I try to return this, it's going to return 444, not found. But if I do home / about, it's going to work. Okay, so that's the work of a prefix. So you can see the difference here is that the name, I think you should use us. Let me try. Yeah, okay. So for the name in the group method, you should use us. So if you wanted to prefix the name of the route, all routes here with the home dot something, you pass the as key, and then the name of the name that you want to be used as the prefix. So let's say you try to access about, it's going to tell you route about not defined, but if you do home dot about, you see it's returning a route. It's able to construct it. Okay, so yeah, cool. So we shall see more, but you can always visit the Laravel documentation, routing documentation, to see more of this. So you may also chain the methods instead of doing it passing as an array like this. You can also chain them before that. So for example, you can remove this here, and say middleware, sorry. Cool. So middleware here, we say it's auth verified. Yeah, so if you try to, let's say we wanted to redirect to that route. Let me remove this first. Okay, so you can see the route. It's working the same way as you would have done if you added here. If you added your middleware here, and then you pass in an array, and that array contains your whatever verified. Cool. And then you have to remove this one here. Cool. So it has this and this without this part. They provide, they give you the same result. So we could also use chain another method, like for example the name. What is the name? Home dot. Let's try to return to construct that URL. Route about not defined because we've changed the name here. Cool. And if we do home dot about, cool, because we've changed it here, but so this has the same effect as this. As home dot. Okay, so if you refresh, same result. Okay, cool, awesome. So method spoofing, yeah. So form method spoofing. So HTML forms do not support the put, patch, and delete methods. So if you would like to use this route defined for these methods, you need to do the following. First, you define a form method as post, and then you provide a hidden method field, and then if you add this field, it's going to, in your form, it's going to be submitted alongside your data in when you make a post request, and this is going to be used as the HTTP method. Okay, so what you do is you define your post method like post, like so, and then you add another field like this. So input type hidden, and then the name is underscore method, and then the value is put. Or you can use a Laravel directive like this. This is going to add a hidden input when the form is rendered. Okay, when the blade template is rendered like that. Okay, so we are going to see more about that because we haven't even defined our views yet. So we'll use that in more detail later. Then CSRF protection. So CSRF, if you try to submit forms using the post, put, patch, and delete method, they will be rejected. All those requests will be rejected. This is because Laravel implements CSRF protection by default for the web routes. So as a result, you need to send a field named token. So if you're going to use any of those methods, like I said, post, post, put, patch, and delete, because they are going to make alterations to data on your server or in your database. Laravel protects your form from cross-site scripting request forgery, so that for the security of your website, of your application. So you need to provide that token, a CSRF token, by doing this, defining a hidden input in your post, or you just write at CSRF directive, okay, so that you can have access to an input that looks like this in your form. All right, we shall see in our next lesson. So what's next? At this point, you should be able to be a little well versed with Laravel's controllers and routing. So next up, we shall be exploring view and blade templates.